correctly.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why this is so confusing in Zoom, actually. I think it's also disturbing because I mean, first time I saw this, I switched it, and then but then it's actually the other way around.
And then it's so if I switch it, then it's wrong for you.
Yeah, you can try.
No, I will not try.
But I think we're doing good now the right way. So
yeah, no. It's
yeah.
Okay, how are you doing? Now you are in Brussels, right?
I am in Brussels. Yeah. I had a really interesting time this morning with colleagues from the European Parliament and the UK mission in Brussels. So I've been doing a bit of what's the word? Policy support and this kind of thing. Trying anyway.
So what is the direction to get better interaction between Great Britain and Europe, or
No. So I work in, part of my talk will be about the Birmingham Institute of Forest Research, which I work in, and it's an excellent facility. It's the only one in Europe. And there's only one other small one in the world at the moment operational. Okay. So we're trying to demonstrate, because we've been out with Brexit, of course, for a few years, what the facility is and how we are getting data that will be very useful to policy making.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, it's interesting, Carl Josef. A lot of the people don't understand the science, and always the economics takes precedent over the science, so it's
that
not
will be
easy.
Interesting. Hello, Natalie.
Hello, sorry for being late, but my computer, at least it's working, because this morning I had a black screen. I was thinking of you, Carl Josef, because it happened to you not long ago. And now I'm trying to have the background that I had before, and now it's not working, so I'm trying again. So, Simon, could you send me the link for the YouTube so I could have the YouTube running at the same time to copy the question in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I don't know. Yesterday I could have the background, and today it's not working.
So how long are you going to stay, Christine, in Brussels?
Oh, I go back tonight.
Okay.
So I had meetings yesterday and today, this morning.
Yeah.
And then I'm in one of the offices here, and when I'm finished, we'll just go to the airport.
Okay. So you prefer airport over? Okay, you have to go to Birmingham. So yes, that's more complicated.
Well,
because
we had lots of luggage because we had all kinds of books. So there was a big event at the UK Embassy on Wednesday night.
Okay.
And so we had to carry lots of presentation items, lots of giveaways, samples, so we just couldn't do it by doing it by train, because we have to go Birmingham, London, then to Brussels. Yes, when you've got a lot of things to carry, it's not easy. But we've given them all away now, so.
Okay, good travel bag, yes.
Yeah.
So, Simon, is it okay if I send the question just to you? I don't know if I can copy both you and Carl Josef for the question that will be on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's okay.
Or Carl Joseph, if you prefer that I send the question.
No, I think Simon does it at least with our webinars in Germany. He does it perfect, so I'm quite sure.
So let's do like that.
Yeah, I never handled the two platforms before, so
okay, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. So that's I think it's okay. We just do the Q&A as we always do, and maybe if you check the questions there, we can also then ping pong, and I'll check the questions from YouTube directly. So maybe Natalie, there's maybe not really because I have it open anyway because I'm the one.
Okay, because I just, thanks to for the link, I just opened it, so I can just try to copy and paste the question. If I have the two, and I will switch off the sound of YouTube.
Germany, he does it.
Yeah, you need to switch off the sound of the. But so yeah, the link was working. I will also put it in the chat here. So if people might, some people they're sometimes on the train or somewhere, so they can have the YouTube link as a backup, because this usually is fail safe. And then, yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Just want to say hello. So I didn't manage to get there yesterday. Mark, yeah.
Everyone is starting to talk about Christmas. It's so terrible. It's great or whatever.
I mean, in Germany, at least, as soon as the Christmas market starts.
As they started, yes, that's right.
I think they start today or tomorrow, so.
Oh, some started before. I think in Bochum, for instance, already 2 weeks back, or Essen, I forgot, somewhere they start extremely early.
Yeah, I just heard from a friend from the Netherlands that they actually, it's a quite common thing for Dutch people to come across the border for at least one day of Weihnachtsmarkt. And to come see and drink a spiced wine.
Sorry about that. That was one of my colleagues
No problem.
asking how it's all gone. So
as long he will not entertain us in the background during your talk, but that's Yes.
I said people should know not to come in, but you
Okay,
never
we'll
can
see.
tell.
Don't worry.
Actually, I have a couple of colleagues who are real experts on different aspects of climate change and forests. So if I get stuck with the questions, I can bring them in.
Maybe we can convince them for a next centenary talk. If you have a recommendation, I think forests would also be very interesting to continue, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, they're kind of neglected in a lot of the things that we talk about, you know, even though they're very important. It's not always seen to be central.
But it's amazing how long 8 minutes last if you are just waiting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I could have checked other things here.
I'm trying to put, you know, to change the picture for the, but I cannot manage to do it, you know, to have the IUBS after logo, like when we will be off during the talk, but it's not working. I could do it on Zoom before when I logged in, but today I don't know. I'm not logged the same way, and I cannot.
It's all right.
Maybe try again now. I just gave you co-host rights, so maybe that helps.
No, because no, I don't think it's changing, because if I check to modify I don't have access to change what they call the vignette, so I don't know. It's not changing anything. I can rename myself, but I cannot change anyhow. It's not a problem.
How are we doing, Simon? Do you know how many people are there now?
So there's 50 people. No, 66 actually at the moment.
Okay.
I think so for all the Europeans, I guess some might still join at the very last minute, because everybody knows that there's going to be a small introduction and everything in the middle of the day. So
yeah, it's increasing, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's constantly getting more. So I was about to say 50, and it was already 66, and now we're almost 80. So usually people are very much on time.
Yeah. That's what I usually do, in fact.
Not to wait those 8 long minutes that you was just talking about, right?
Yeah.
I think that's perfectly normal. Yeah, but now it's 3. I think I will just start with the technicalities. So first of all, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure for me to welcome Christine Foyer today. She will talk about how will plants adapt to a high CO2 world. And before Karl Josef is giving more details about Christine's CV, I would just want to give you a short intro about the technicalities. So you can ask all kinds of questions after the talk. Please also, if you have a question already during the talk, you can use the Q&A function of Zoom, which you will find if you just move your cursor in the Zoom field. It's the Q&A button pretty much in the middle of this menu. Then you can type in your question, and if you find a similar question that someone already asked, you can just like the question, so it will be prioritized, and then we will try to answer it earlier than the others. You can also use the chat if you have any comments. If you want to say thanks in the very end, also use this one. I will also now quickly share the YouTube channel with you in case something if you're on a journey or something, if you're kicked out of the Zoom, you can use the YouTube channel also to watch us. And now to start, we would also like to know where you are from and what you're doing. And so to make it a bit more interactive in the very beginning, please use the link now and tell us where you're from and what is your occupation currently. I don't know, maybe Carl Josef, maybe you can do the introduction already, and then we can see the results after the intro.
Great. So Simon, thanks a lot. So it's my pleasure to welcome you as president of IUBS. So you can see it's our lecture number 5 within this webinar series that was initiated 4 years back by our former president, Professor Shashidhara, called Shashi. Because at that time, IUBS became 100 years. And so, as you can then calculate, we were founded in 1919, and IUBS is the international voice of biology, like, for instance, the UPAC, International Union of Biology, Pure and Applied Chemistry for chemistry. And so what is our job? Our job is to feed information on biology and science into the United Nations organizations like UN, UNESCO, the International Science Council. And so we are standing up for giving biology the necessary weight and voice and considerations in context of decisions made towards maintaining biodiversity and sustainability. And naturally, we are fighting for science facts-based decisions. That is most important. Okay, we also support young bioscientists and international meetings. And so I refer maybe to our internet pages before I talk too long. I should mention that our office is in Paris, and you can see maybe Nathalie Fonbras. She is our scientific director. And so now I would like to go on, and I'm I should say, extremely happy to introduce Christine, because I could say, I should not say it, I met her the first time maybe 40 years back. At that time, she was, I will mention in a few seconds, at Sheffield, ARC Institute for Photosynthesis. And so I came as a PhD student, and we did a very marvelous work, to my opinion, a very nice work. And we published it. So Christine and I had a paper together at that time. So that was a starting point. Thanks, Christine. So Christine is a very esteemed researcher on photosynthesis. You will see it later on. So shortly, her CV, she did her bachelor at the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom and her PhD at King's College. And then she moved to Sheffield, what I just mentioned, to this very famous and well-supported institute researching photosynthesis and, I would say, secondary carbon metabolism of photosynthesis. That was the topic of this research unit. And then she became research director in France, in Versailles, and then she moved on to Abruzos and Harpenden. So maybe I should not name all her very important stays in between. So she is a extremely well-known scientist in plant metabolism, and there is one pathway that is called after her. It's a Asada Foyer cycle, which is a detoxification system to get rid of hydrogen peroxide that is produced in photosynthesis. And maybe I should not name everything what is written in her CV. So she was president of various institutions and board members, and she has many very well-cited publications. So is a highly cited researcher for quite a long time. And maybe I just mentioned one thing. There was a very nice article in Antioxidants and Redox Signaling calling her redox pioneer. So Christine is a redox pioneer, but she has many others honors and awards. So maybe I should not talk too long about Christine. One could go on, but give Christine the floor. So we are very much looking forward to how plants adapt to a high CO2 world. Christine.
Just
okay.
Before we start the talk, we wanted to have a quick result. So I think around a third of the people that are watching just chose to use the link and answer where they're from. So I think almost 90% are from Western Europe, but we also have a few listeners from Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia. Most of them are researchers in academia. It's a third. 13% are educators, 20% are bachelor students, 10% are master students, 16% are PhD students, 5% postdoc fellows, and another 5% chose other. So that's all of it from me now. And now, please, Christine.
Thank you. I need to share my screen, so yes. We need to change the image.
So Natalie
on the
should
screen.
Finish. Yes, Natalie.
Okay. Okay, can everybody see that?
Perfect.
It's such a pleasure to be here today and have this opportunity to talk to you. When Carl Josef asked me, I was delighted. I really like to share the knowledge that we have and to discuss key issues with people in the wider community. I want to talk to you today about something that's very dear to my heart, and that's how plants are going to grow and adapt to a high CO2 world. I'm going to start with an introduction, and then I will talk to you about plants and the way that they respond to high CO2 and climate change. And then I will show you some of the ways and the mechanisms that we study and the ways that we study them. Perhaps you know that the world is changing. That is not responding, sorry. There we go, sorry. There we go, it's a little bit slow, excuse me. So we have a world with an increasing population, and this puts huge demand on the resources that we have. So as you see here, that we really do need to think about supplying not only the food needs for the world, but the increasing demands for water and energy. So we have to produce 50% more food over the coming years. In a world where we have no more land and there are going to be shortages of water and fertilizers. So we have to think very hard about how plants grow, how we produce crops, and how we can maximize the growth of crops in a changing world. And of course, the biggest problem that we have is the uncertainty that is climate change and how weather patterns will change our ability to produce the amount of food that we need for the population in 2050. So these are big questions. And I want to really just start at the beginning. So we know our world is changing. we talk about climate change. Climate change is the change in weather patterns over long periods. So weather is what we experience day to day, but the climate is something which is established over years and decades. And so we knew pretty much in the last century what the patterns of weather were, and we are now able to monitor them closely so that we can see very carefully and with detail how our climate is changing. And one of the biggest features is global warming, the increases in temperature, which are down largely to the activities of man. This isn't a new phenomena. As far back as the 1800s, people were thinking that the climate was changing, and they related it to fossil fuels and the burning of fossil fuels. And then for a few decades, there was a loss of interest at the beginning of the 1900s. And then this wonderful man called Guy Calander, who wasn't even a scientist, really, he was a steam engineer. He had an interest in the climate, and he started looking at data which was available to him. And he worked from home, just taking the data that he could get across the world and plotting changes in temperature against CO2. And in 1938, he was able to establish the idea that changes in temperature were coming about because of the release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And here's just an example of some of his work. And you can see how he plotted it all by hand and really established that the changes were happening, and he was able to relate it to CO2. So even though maybe many people in this audience maybe aren't scientists, having an interest is what matters. And bringing your own dynamic inspiration to what data is available can really help. So we've known about climate change in its current form for quite a long time, but it's only really in the last 2 decades that the increases in global temperature have become apparent. And this is data from several sources, and you can see the way that climate is changing. So you can see what the levels were in pre-industrial times and how over the last decades we have well exceeded them. We are now about 1.2 ppm above pre-industrial times, which is really quite important. Sorry, we're 1.2 degrees, excuse me, above industrial times, which is serious for climate change. And you know, I'm sure that climate change phenomena have been now documented across the world. So we know that last year, 2002, was one of the warmest years on record. And in fact, the last 9 have been the 9 warmest years on record. So this is serious, and it is continually increasing. And the change in temperature that you see here is coming year upon year and year. So the temperature extremes are increasing every year. And with this comes increasing extremes of weather. So we get increasing heat waves, we get increasing droughts, and we get increasing floods. So the effects are really quite severe. So looking at how the climate is changing and how it relates to the CO2 content in the atmosphere has really shown that the human being influence is the strongest input into those changes. And the human influence has been due to the release of greenhouse gases, which include carbon dioxide. So just a little bit of data here, and you see at the very bottom that 20 major climate-related disasters were recorded in 2021, and you see the cost of these. So climate change has a huge cost implication, and it impacts on everybody, and it will be increasingly impactful. So climate change is due to the greenhouse effect, which is due to the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. What is the greenhouse gas? What are greenhouse gases, and what is the greenhouse gas effect? It is based on the fact that the Earth is warmed by radiation from the sun. Normally that radiation is released as heat, and so the heat would be released, and the Earth could be a very cold place if it wasn't for the fact that in the atmosphere we have gases that seal in the heat, and we call those greenhouse gases. This includes carbon dioxide and methane, but they have allowed the Earth to warm, and we have this wonderful planet that we have. And until the activities of man, this was in a very nice equilibrium. So now the greenhouse gas effect is being exacerbated because we release CO2 and other gases into the atmosphere in excess of what can be trapped by the plants and animals that feed upon them. So greenhouse gases, what are they? They're listed here. Water vapor can act as a greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone. So we have these greenhouse gases, but they have different levels of activity. So the effect of methane, for example, is 40 times that of carbon dioxide in keeping heat in the atmosphere. If you look across here at this table, which comes from a publication in 2000, you will see here that actually the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is listed at about 360 ppm, but the CO2 is changing rapidly. Now, when I started working with Carl Joseph in 40 years ago, when we measured photosynthesis, we knew that CO2 in the atmosphere was 340 ppm, and we set our machinery to measure photosynthesis at that. And you see now, last year, the level was 420 ppm. So that's what it is now. So within my working lifetime, we have an 80 ppm increase in CO2. Really quite serious in terms of the effect on the greenhouse gases. So where do some of these greenhouse gases come from? CO2 from the burning of fossil fuels, but methane comes mostly from our agriculture. And a lot of it comes from cows, which produce methane as part of their digestion. Other systems, such as rice paddy fields, produce a large amount of methane. So agriculture is also responsible for some of the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Some data here so you can actually see it. So you can see 65%. You can see the time along the bottom, the time scale. You can see the various effects. So a large proportion, 60%, is due to the burning of fossil fuels. But you can also see the release of other gases, such as methane into the atmosphere, the light blue at 18%. So these gases all contribute to climate change. And when we think about climate change and solution to climate change, of course, we have to stop burning fossil fuels, and we need to find alternatives to the current fuels that we use that don't release greenhouse gases. But other systems such as agriculture have a role to play, and we have to modify agriculture so there is less release of greenhouse gases. So when we come to predict the effects of climate change on temperature, etc., you see in the literature, if you look at these kind of things, RCP values, these are representative concentration pathways. because knowing how CO2 and other greenhouse gases are going to affect climate isn't a known science, it's a predicted science. So when you hear about changes in temperature related to the CO2 and other gases in the atmosphere, you will see them as these RCP pathways. And so they are predicted changes. So if we get a change of 2.5, you will see here the relative change. As it stands, we hoped that we'd keep to the lower RCPs, but we are on a current trend to the highest. It's the worst case scenario. So the predicted changes are on a representative concentration pathway change of 8. And so we are really in need of ways to stop this now. So what do we do? So within the governmental concepts and the political ways to resolve the issues, we have to go for mitigation. So you know the processes which are in place to mitigate if the effects of CO2 release, to stop burning fossil fuels, and to change our cars to electric cars. So that is one way. But we still have to deal with the CO2 which is already in the atmosphere, and we call that adaptation. And so we have to find ways to reduce the levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And one of the ways is to use the normal systems that are in our atmosphere that take up CO2 and methane and other processes. So I'm not going to talk much about methane. There is a methane cycle in the soil which has microorganisms which deal with methane. But within an ecosystem, you probably know there is balance. There is balance between what we call producers. These are the plants and the photosynthetic systems. These are autotrophs. These systems use light energy to take CO2 out of the atmosphere in the process of we call photosynthesis. And they fix it into biomass. And that biomass is used by all of the other consumers in the system, which includes you and I, and all of the herbivores and the carnivores, the parasites that live on us. We use that biomass to support our well-being and our lives. And in the end, of course, we all die, and our remains are decomposed. It really depends in this system how much of that decomposition is taken back into the soil and stored in the soil. And it is the microorganisms in the soil which actually cause the long-term deposition. But it is the ecosystem working together which is thought to solve some of the problems, or to be able to solve some of the problems. So let's go back to basics. So we depend on photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It produces all the food we eat and all of the oxygen we breathe, as well as all of our fossil fuels. It's the process, as I told you, where plants, algae, and some bacteria use sunlight. And they use that sunlight to take CO2 and to make the building blocks of biomass. So they make all of the compounds that are necessary to produce cells and to accumulate biomass, which is circulated then through the ecosystem. Photosynthesis takes light energy to fix CO2 using water to produce carbohydrate, which is then used to produce biomass, which with the release of oxygen. And there you get the oxygen, which is recycled through the atmosphere. So Light energy through photosynthesis produces biomass. We and plants also use that biomass in the process of respiration to release energy, support our lives and well-being. But I want to just go back and think about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is really important. Here you see a map of the world. I don't know, whether you know what you're seeing, but photosynthesis is the only process you can view from space. And for the last 40 years, the process of photosynthesis has been viewed from space. You can see here the greening of the Earth over a year time scale. So you can see how the Earth greens as sunlight moves from the upper to the lower tropics. So it's a wonderful process that we see from space. And using the information that we can get from measuring photosynthesis and the processes associated with it, we know how much carbon is stored within an ecosystem and within a biosphere. So we use some calculations here. So primary productivity of an ecosystem, that's the amount of carbon which is fixed through plant photosynthesis. And then we have to do some calculations to come to net primary productivity, because the carbon that is fixed by plants is also used by plants and other organisms through respiration. And the difference between what is fixed and what is used is the net carbon which is stored in our biosphere. And that's the value we need to increase, particularly within the soil. So when you look across the globe, you can see the areas of the world which are the best at net productivity. You see South America and places, for example, in China. Europe is quite good, it's not the best, but other parts of the world are not quite so good, because there the growth of plants is limited by temperature and other factors. So you see the areas of the world where productivity is greatest. And this slide shows you what organisms contribute to it. You don't need to look at all of the different parts, but just look at part C. And you can see here that the oceans are very important in contributing to our productivity, but particularly if you look at the brown, the tropical rainforest and the savanna. So we rely a lot on tropical rainforests and grasslands. So the ecosystems that capture and trap most carbon are our forests and our grassland areas. These have plants which live long term and are able to sequester carbon not only in themselves, but they supply the soil and the microorganisms, and they can store carbon deep in the soil. Climate-based solutions or nature-based solutions to climate change really depend on the activities of plants, particularly our forests and our grasslands, in trapping carbon and putting that back into the soil. How does it happen? I'm sorry if you're not particularly interested or know not a lot about plant metabolism, but the reason why we believe that plants will be able to capture the CO2, which has been released into the activities by the activities of man, is because of the process of photosynthesis. And this occurs in chloroplasts. Within the heart of the chloroplasts, there is an enzyme that we call rubisco, which evolved long time ago. This enzyme is the only enzyme which really is able to fix carbon in a sustainable manner. And as you can see here, it takes CO2 and it fixes it into sugars and biomass. However, when this enzyme evolved, there wasn't really a necessity to distinguish too much between CO2 and oxygen. And so it's very poor in distinguishing by CO2 between CO2 and oxygen. And so sorry, I'm trying to send that back. And so at the moment, some of the carbon which is fixed in the plants we call C3 plants, which are the majority of plants, is wasted again because during times when it's very hot and dry, the Rubisco enzyme simply uses oxygen instead of CO2, and you see this process here that we call photorespiration, and that releases CO2. So it has a negative impact. So when we increase the CO2 in the atmosphere, it simply enhances the capacity of Rubisco to fix carbon and prevents the negative pathway of photorespiration. So the CO2 increase in the atmosphere will be offset by the capacity of Rubisco to take that up and use that for biomass production. And we know this is true, right? I don't know whether you know this, you've probably all heard of the negative impacts of climate change. But as I showed you previously, for the last 40 years, the Earth has been monitored by satellites in space. And what is particularly monitored is the greenness of the Earth and the brownness of the Earth. So scientists are worried that deserts will increase. So there is continuous monitoring of the greenness and the brownness of the Earth. And what has been amazing is that we can see that over the last 35 years, there's been a huge increase in the greenness of the Earth. That is leaf area. There is a large increase in leaf area, which is down to CO2. And if you read the NASA website, this is equivalent to the size of the Amazon. So this is amazing. The Earth and plants have the capacity to take up this CO2 and use it for biomass production. We call this the carbon fertilization effect. And it's really important in combating the high CO2 in the atmosphere. However, this is the good side. So are there any downsides? And a lot of this we really don't know. We know carbon dioxide is accumulating faster than any other time in our history. Plants can't adapt so fast. So adaptation changes in genetic patterns takes time. The increase in CO2 is really so fast that plants really are struggling to adapt. However, CO2 enrichment stimulates photosynthesis, increases biomass production. But when you increase biomass production, you put a lot of strain on the uptake of other nutrients. So becoming rich in carbon, plants become a little bit like diabetic people. It puts a strain on the cells and in other systems. And that's particularly true of the requirement for other nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphate in the soil. If you get too much carbohydrate accumulation in the leaves because they can't grow fast enough, that can also cause a problem in terms of regulating genes and photosynthesis. It's a problem. So one of the key issues that we're really concerned about is what will limit the capacity of plants to take up CO2 and offset the carbon gain. One of the key things might be the rate of uptake of other nutrients, such as nitrogen. And that can really impact on the plants, but also on the microorganisms in the soil, because the soil provides the nitrogen, so the soil can be completely depleted of nitrogen. And there are many unknowns here. So I can't tell you one way or another what will happen, but it might be different in different ecosystems. We simply just don't know. We think that this is a problem. What we do know, though, is there are impacts which are hidden. And one of the most important that I think is meaningful for us is the strain that is put on the acquisition of nutrients which are important to humans. You probably know that we require essential minerals, particularly iron and zinc, really meaningful to us. A depletion in iron really causes problems of fatigue because of respiration. Many women across the world are short of iron. And what I'm showing you here is the result of a meta-analysis. This means that in the paper written at the bottom, they looked at a huge number of observations, over 7,000. They looked at all the data from these different measurements, including ones which we call FACE in the middle, which I will explain to you later. But looking at all this data, they took the whole lot together, and they could see quite clearly that the nutritional quality of the food that we eat is decreasing. This is true of vegetables and seeds. So we have to be very careful to ensure that this doesn't happen progressively. And there is a syndrome called hidden hunger, which happens in a lot of countries in the world now, but it can only get worse if we don't tackle this problem now. So there is this drawback. There is also the problem of a decrease in protein in our nutrients. So we get a decrease in the ions that we need and a decrease in protein. And again, this has been measured across many systems of plants, and it seems that protein will decrease. So our diets will become more rich in carbohydrates and depleted in nutrients and proteins as plants adapt to a high CO2 world. So we have to be careful of these risks and to work against them. So how do we measure? How do we measure all these things? Well, when Carl Josef and I started, we measured everything in controlled environment chambers. We could only do it in the laboratory. So we would take chambers like the ones shown in the diagram at the bottom here. And in those chambers, we would grow plants in an atmosphere with high CO2. That does have drawbacks, because no matter how you do it, it's not a natural environment, and you have to constrain the roots in pots or some kind of growing medium. So there are real drawbacks to data from controlled environment facilities. So we now much more look at what we call FACE sites, free air CO2 enrichment sites. These are sites which have been developed over the last 40 years, which allow plants to grow under normal conditions in the field situations, but we supply them with high CO2. And I'm going to show you that now. This is a field site in Urbana in Illinois. These are slides from Lisa Ainsworth, who's worked a long time on this field site in Urbana. So you see crops in the fields in Urbana. These are crops. You can have soybean, maize, other crops here. And within these normal crop growing areas, we put in place rings. These are rings of pipes. These pipes supply gases, mainly CO2, if you want to look at climate change. And you see in the middle, you have a weather station. That weather station measures many things, but predominantly the flow, the wind direction across the field. And so the pipes, if the wind is going in the direction of the yellow arrow, will supply CO2 in that way. If the wind direction changes, then the CO2 it goes in the other direction. So you have a constant increase in CO2 just across the area within the ring of the pipes. And within most of the systems, these FACE systems, we generally go for a level of CO2, which is 150 ppm or so above ambient. That is the level of CO2 that we expect to be prevalent in 2050. It's not going to be decreased before that. So that's the way it is done. And this is the way that crops have been studied over the last 35 years. Within that system, you can make changes, you can add other stresses, you could deprive water in certain parts if you want to look at the effect of high CO2 and water deficit, for example. You can add other gases such as ozone if you want to look at the combined effect of pollution and CO2. But it's a wonderful system, and it enables you within real world conditions. So you've got normal weather patterns looking at the effect of high CO2. So you can have drought, temperature, for example. This is what they call soybean face experiments that have been going for the last 35 years. Now, this is where I work. This is the Birmingham Institute for Forest Research, and we have a face site in a forest. This is really, really important. So there have previously been face sites in forests, but many of them have dealt with young trees, saplings, and new forests. There have been very few studies on mature forests. So in Birmingham, we have a mature oak and ash forest. It's a mixed forest. These trees are nearly 200 years old. And we wanted to ask the question, if you have plants that are really well established, they're much older than me and Carl Joseph, and that sort of thing, isn't it, Carl Joseph, to say? So how will they respond to high CO2? So this face site was set up in 2014. We took 3 years of baseline data, and we started the CO2, high CO2 application in 2016. So we have 7 years of accumulating data. And you see we keep the CO2 150 ppm above ambient. And we have a weather station exactly the same as in the different weather stations, monitoring towers. So we do it exactly as I showed you for the crops. But in this instance, you can see these pipes are huge. They go from right at the top of the trees to the very ground. And it's an open site. We monitor everything. We monitor the above ground processes. We monitor the soil processes. Within the system, animals and insects move freely. We monitor the insects, the herbivores. We monitor the pathogens in that system because we want to know how the whole ecosystem of those trees changes in response to high CO2. So this is where I work. This is our face facility. Again, you can see at the very bottom the system of pipes that we have that provide the CO2, excuse me, but it is open. There are no fences around this system. Animals move freely. We have a real problem with squirrels and deer that come in, but that's life, that's the ecosystem. So we monitor year on year, and I just show you some of the effects here. We have plenty of data, but you don't need to see data. Surprisingly, the rate of photosynthesis has increased above ambient every year. And not only that, we see these trees, which are already 200 years old, increasing in timber growth by growth in high CO2. So there is a real benefit in these mature forests. And here is a summary of everything that we know. So look, we do measure above ground. You see increases in photosynthesis, increases in timber, increases in the litter which drops to the ground. So we really know that these old trees benefit from the high CO2. And if you look at the below ground on here, what is really interesting is these mature trees produce lots of fine roots. So they're not static, they really respond. those roots release more carbon and we have more microbes. The soil becomes increasingly healthy. It's full of microbes and we get greater microbial respiration. So soil health is improved. But you can see here, that's at the expense of soil nitrogen. So for now, all of the findings are positive. We want to carry on to 25 years because we need to see how long. Short-term effects are very good, but to really know, we need to do these measurements over 25 years. And I'm just going to finish now. Unless Carl Joseph, have I used my time? Am I okay to carry on? 5 more minutes. Thank you. So
yes,
I
please
just
continue. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to talk about another system. So I've also been involved in projects in the Amazonian forest, looking at the effects of climate change, not CO2 in this instance, although I must say that my institute has just been involved in setting up the first face site in the Amazon, the very first face site, and they used our technology to set up the face site in the Amazon. This is really important because temperatures are changing and the environment is changing very rapidly in the Amazon. So here you see daytime maximum temperatures and nighttime minimum temperatures, 1997 to 2006. If you look over the pattern, 2007, 2016, you see the number of maxima is increasing and it's getting more. And also there are changes in the nighttime temperatures. But the serious increase, I haven't got the latest figures for you, but believe me, it's growing year on year. And you can see the increases and the shift in temperatures here. So the temperatures are shifting to higher and higher temperatures. So you see here the number of days where the trees experience temperatures well over 40 degrees. So we have a site which is in a place called Nova Shavantina, which is really in the southern borders of the rainforest, in one of the warmest places. And this is a restricted site, so we only go there occasionally. People only go to do measurements on selected times. What we do though is monitor remotely. So we have a remote platform which is constantly measuring the performance of the trees and the properties of the trees in the Amazon. And we can measure the crowns. So this is the view from the camera that you can see from the laboratory. So this is our rainforest. There are different types of trees. These are real pictures, real-time pictures. And you can see the crowns of different trees. And we monitor them 24 hours a day. And we look at the temperature of those trees. And one of the most interesting things, if you look at the temperature of the trees at midday, you can see the average temperatures. So a lot of the trees are maintaining temperatures which are below ambient, below about 35. But surprisingly, there is one crown and certain trees which are well above the ambient temperature. And that was a surprise. So not all trees behave the same. And if you look at the air temperature, and the species that show this anomaly, they seem to prefer to keep warmer all the time. So they maintain a temperature above ambient, both day and night. A real surprise. So we don't know everything. We know some things, but we have a lot more to learn. So putting a face site in the Amazon is really important. So we know not only how trees in the temperate world operate, but also in the tropics and the hottest places on Earth. So you can see the temperature difference here, day and night. So I'm going to finish now. So I just want to, well, I hope I've shown you how much plants can benefit from the CO2 in the atmosphere. They do grow better, but there are limitations, and that is due to the requirement for other nutrients from the soil. Nature-based solutions to climate change require our forests and grasslands to assimilate that carbon and also to pass it to the soils. And I've shown you some data to suggest that that is actually working even now. However, we need to be sure that the foods and the seeds that are produced under a high CO2 world contain the nutrients that we need, and they're not depleted in nutrients as a result of high CO2. We need also to get more data about tropical forests, because as the temperature increases, certain parts of the earth, particularly the tropics, are experiencing on a day-to-day basis very high temperatures, and it's only increasing. We really don't know when the trees are going to die, but they're okay for the moment. We know that, but it's surprising what temperatures they can stand. But the thresholds and when they above which they can't survive is really unknown at the moment. But I'm in Brussels, and I was really pleased to see this sign when I passed the European Parliament yesterday. This is a sign outside the that should say 2023, excuse me. This is the sign outside the European Parliament, so we have hope. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Christine. Great data, very interesting. So probably on behalf of all listeners, very grateful for your time and your insight. We have a few questions. Maybe I can ask one beforehand. You described this fantastic system in Birmingham, this phase system in the forest to increase CO2. And then it was very impressive how detailed the measurements are done. So you were saying it's canopy increase, it's increase in bark, it's changes in soil. Could you describe a little bit how this detailed analysis is done? So are there 1,000 researchers working in the forest all the time and measuring these data, or how is it done? Yeah.
Right. Let me tell you, yes, the Birmingham Institute of Forest Research is over 100 people working in the forest. It's completely interdisciplinary. We measure everything because, of course, you require specialists. So we have everybody from people like me who can measure photosynthesis. So we literally have systems of pulleys, and we winch people into the trees every day, and they go up there with our apparatus to measure photosynthesis. We also have people who are actively measuring all the other parameters, people who measure the diseases. So we measure the number of pathogens, the number of insects, the spread of them. So each person is working together. We also systematically have people working on the soil. We collect all the leaf litter, we collect everything that drops, we collect everything in the soil. So we have over 100 people who are permanent staff and PhD students, but we also have a huge number of visiting workers. Our system is used globally, and the data is used by modelers that come in. So we model what we have, but we also have other disciplines. So we have social scientists, we have economists, and a wide diversity of people who are looking at all of the aspects of the forest, because we see future forests as being something which is used by everybody. So not just forests for timber, future forests have to be acceptable society. They have to have benefits to society, as well as solving the problems of climate change. But one of the things that we do, which should probably interest you, is we have a huge epigenetics program. So we're looking at how the trees remember the CO2 and the patterns. So we have people who are really geneticists as well. This is a huge array of people. Yes, it couldn't be one person. It really is a mammoth effort. But anybody who's interested here can really come in and look at the data and be involved. We do a lot of citizen science. We do a lot of work with children because we want people to be involved. Of course, it's a restricted site. People come in, you know, as we bring them into the site, we invite them. We want people to be involved. But yes, it's a huge effort, Collier.
Yes. So, Simon, did you receive some questions?
I did, yeah. We can go through them. For me, I have one question. Maybe we can collect a few more. So I was interested in this hidden hunger. You mentioned that nutritions, they decrease while the CO2 levels go up. Maybe I missed it. Maybe you said something about the reasons behind that. Could you, are there any ideas how this is actually decreasing?
I mean, you've identified a real problem. So we've known for a while that this was happening, but there's been very little research on it. Most people who work on high CO2 work only on the biomass, the green parts. They don't really look at the nutritional aspects. And many people in the world now already suffer from hidden hunger. There's a real problem in mineral nutrition. So you can make guesses as to why it happens, because, you know, there is a huge extra requirement for the uptake of these minerals to be put into seeds and edible organs. But this is only part of the answer. That's just guesswork, really. The more we look at it, the more we find that there are adaptive mechanisms in the plant. So I drew the analogy with diabetes, and it's true that the plants become carbon rich, and the changes in gene expression that go with this seem to influence a range of transporters and processes that we never even thought of. Some of the things that are coming in the literature now are very interesting, but we don't know why, really, and we need to know why so we can stop it and reverse it. It's really important. Yeah, such a big issue, you know, particularly if the world goes vegan.
Yeah.
Okay. I can summarize maybe a few questions that all targets the same, namely, how do plants then in the future adapt to high CO2? And one question was asking whether we can learn something from acclimatization or adaptation in the Paleocene, so in former times when CO2 increased slowly. But most questions refer to what can be expected in terms of changes, adaptation in our species when now CO2 is rising so fast. So there is this historical question, and what would you expect how plants acclimate nowadays?
Right. It is interesting to draw analogies, but the rise in CO2 is so fast that the change is different. And there is another part of this talk that I didn't talk about, which is plants also perceive high CO2 as a stress signal. In fact, some of you maybe know that CO2 closes stomata on plants. So plants sense CO2 in addition to using it to make carbohydrate. And we used to think that the signaling system in stomata was unique, but it appears that all cells perceive CO2 and they perceive it as a stress. So there is a very different set of processes going on now within plants than the slow adaptation. So it's probably very different, and the analogies are not really there. Yes. I mean, again, how will we adapt, Carl-Josef? It's really interesting. One of the reasons that we monitor all the insects and the animals, we don't actually harvest the animals, but we harvest the insects, because we look not only at the type of insects, we look at the weight of insects, we look at the way that they are changing, because it is really important to know how all the organisms in the ecosystem change in a high CO2 world. Mm-hmm. And you know, with us, I mean, one of the dangers is that, you know, obesity is a big issue now. And within the next 20 years, if we don't do something, we'll probably get fatter and more nutrient poor. So the pressures on our health. I'm here at the European Parliament talking about One Health. Mm-hmm. So in nature, all organisms are joined through the microbes and the ways that we depend on each other. There is One Health. And we have to know that the health of the plants and the microorganisms impacts on us. So many unknowns, but I fear that's the future. We'll become fatter and less healthy unless we really do something.
Okay, Christine, maybe I can ask a question of Bhumina Tripathi. I know very well. Hello. Is there any contribution of microbes that they could be used maybe to ameliorate these climate change effects?
Yeah. Really, one of the big problems is we haven't put enough emphasis on microbes. Now there is a huge push to understand the microbes in the soil, to work with the microbes in the soil. I touched on methane, but the microbes can have a much better capacity to take up greenhouse gases and to store them in the soil. And there is a huge push, as I'm sure you'll know, to have better interactions between plants and microbes. So we use the relationships between the plants and their associated microbiomes to benefit the plants and to resolve these issues. So yes, the answer is definitely yes.
Mm-hmm. So we need more research. Maybe I ask a question which is related to a previous one, namely, what could we do to improve the nutrient availability? Can we somehow affect nitrogen or whatsoever, fertilize the forest or whatsoever? Would you recommend it? Or is it maybe not advisable?
Yeah, it's not advisable for all of the problems we know with fertilization, because nitrate is a very labile molecule in the soil. You get a lot of runoff from water, pollution of water. It is possible, of course, to fertilize the forest, to fertilize the oceans to make them greener, but the effects are very unpredictable. So limited fertilization might help. But we need to change the way we use fertilizers as well. We need less reliance on fertilizers, so it's not the answer, at least in the long term.
Okay, sorry, Simon wrote something.
No. Yeah, someone was asking a question in the chat also. How to identify methane-producing organisms present in the rice paddy fields?
Do you know, I am not a microbiologist and I don't know that, but I know there are large groups of people, including the ones that work alongside me, and they use, of course, new genetic methods, DNA technologies. There have been huge advances in the last 5 years in identifying microorganisms. And I do know that the people who only work on the microbes are in an excellent position to modify them genetically to make them much better. You can make huge advances in carbon fixations in microbes by molecular genetic means that shouldn't have negative effects further on. So there's a huge potential in modifying microbes if it is acceptable to society. But yes, so it is possible, it's doable now. And there are a lot of teams working on it, but we don't do it with a view to putting those microbes in the soil or in paddy fields.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the same direction, we talked about the hidden hunger, and are there any practical solutions to deal with the nutrient limitation that you highlighted? And I think you partially answered this, because there's a lack of knowledge, I think, in the first place to actually know what's happening before, you know, especially in our countries where maybe a lot of those solutions that would be available then cannot go through.
I mean, it's really a big problem. I mean, as I mentioned, the problem of women. I mean, most women of childbearing age are iron deficient a lot of the time. They simply don't know it. You know, they just feel a little bit more tired, you know, and they just pass it off. In countries where there is a severe limitation, they try, of course, supplements, but supplements only work in the short term. You can't live your life on supplements, and supplements have disadvantages as well. So we really do have to get to the bottom of the plants, understanding how we make the plants better, improve the nutrition of the plants, because then when people live in poor regions which are inaccessible, if they can grow plants which are enriched in the nutrients they need, then that is the answer. Supplements are not the answer long term.
Yeah, and I think with iron deficiency, it's even you know, the resorption, the uptake by humans, it's quite tricky also, because a lot of the things that we consume a lot, like caffeine, alcohol, and stuff like this, they limit also the uptake. So that's a huge point as well.
It's a real problem. You're right.
So I have a very, very good question also in the chat, and I think we need to listen carefully. So increased production by plants under high CO2 should lead to a higher water use of the increased leaf area. On the other hand, water use efficiency should also be improved and transpiration reduced. Which of these two counteracting effects will prevail?
Well, one of the effects of high CO2 is to partially close stomata. So we do see greater water use efficiency under high CO2 under the conditions we have it. But this is a real problem. For plant scientists, we're working on many issues at the same time. We need to produce plants that are more water use efficient, that are more nitrogen use efficient, and yet have a high yield and are resilient to high CO2. So I would definitely say that we really need to focus on water use efficiency for sure. But high CO2 does partially protect against drought because of this closure of stomata. But it's not a major factor really in drought, but it is a partial protection.
Okay, so maybe a technical question that was asked very early on, namely, how is the Earth-wide, let's say, global temperature measured?
Well, again, I'm not an expert in this, but the satellites that monitor the Earth have the technology to do it. I think possibly you could find it on the NASA website or the subsequent websites, but they're very, I mean, over the last 40 years, these systems have become more and more sophisticated. They're incredibly good at measuring small changes now. So yes, I don't know. I'm sorry not to be able to answer that, but I do know that the technology is really good these days.
Simon, do you have another one?
Yeah, I have one. Someone is suggesting also using your experimental setup for aquatic plants in the tropics. But aquatic plants, like, how do the increasing CO2 for aquatic plants to have an effect should also, how big is the impact, or how dependent, or how is the balance even in water? I think this is a whole different environment.
In the ocean, I've never seen a study on aquatic plants. I'm sure they probably exist. the problem in the oceans is the availability of nutrients. So the photosynthetic microorganisms in the oceans are good at taking up CO2, but they're very nutrient deficient. And so they are very dependent on what we call upwellings of nutrients from lower depths coming up. Yeah, it'd be interesting to do a study on aquatic plants, but I presume we get the same effects on aquatic plants, but I have no knowledge of such data.
Yeah, there are many detailed questions. In fact, very interesting one. I'm not sure, maybe it's too special. So it is about, for instance, how alpine plants, or in general, you mentioned that CO2 can be a stressor to plants. And apparently, Christoph Thron has made measurements in alpine plants and could not observe such stress effects. So I understand this question. What is your definition of stress in the plants under high CO2?
Right, I didn't talk about this, but CO2 can act as a signal that triggers the wave of reactive oxygen species. So this is it's called a Ross wave that leads to systemic acclimation and increases in defenses. So the stress effect isn't necessarily a negative effect, but it actually increases resistance to pathogens. There are several papers on this. The signaling from CO2 also participates in the association of mycorrhiza in the roots. So the signal goes from the shoot to the root. And we know that this isn't just a carbohydrate signal. We know that this involves reactive oxygen species and a signaling cascade, which is different. Now, I call that a stress signaling cascade because it is part of the system which is general for all forms of stresses. So it's not a stress effect in having a negative effect. It's an effect that reinforces the defenses systemically across the plant.
Okay, great. I think that answers the question. So maybe we should come to an end. I'm not sure. Maybe Simon has to ask the most liked question.
The most liked question is a bit funny. But I think it's also something that you mentioned during your talk. So the most liked question is actually, will rising CO2 levels affect the sweetness of watermelon?
Oh, yes, I'm sure that's true. The watermelon will certainly become sweeter, definitely.
Okay, so is it good or not good? That's the question. So hidden hunger.
Hidden hunger, yeah.
Okay.
If everybody goes home remembering that, Carl-Josef, I think that's a good message.
Yeah. So I don't know, is there any urgent questions you identify, Simon? Otherwise, I guess we should close it, right?
I think it's okay, yeah.
So thanks to all listeners. Thanks for joining. Thanks to Christine. Thanks to Simon and all others. See you again. We will announce our next centenary webinar at some point, and so please join again. It's great. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Also for asking the questions and answering them.
Yes.
Bye-bye.